The inaugural Live and Learn session today is on the rape exception. And I will talk in a moment about why we chose this topic to begin with. But I think a good starting place always is to talk about what the pro-life argument is. So I apologize. I'm a philosophy major. That will come out sometime. This is what we call a syllogism in philosophy, which is that if the first two premises are correct, the conclusion must be correct as well. It is inescapable. So in a nutshell, the pro-life argument is it's wrong to kill innocent human beings. Abortion kills innocent human beings, and therefore abortion is wrong. So pro-choicers might respond to this argument in a number of ways. They might claim that the preborn are not human beings, and therefore abortion doesn't kill human beings. They would be wrong in saying that, but some will argue that. And some will also argue that maybe it's usually wrong to kill innocent human beings, but it really depends on the circumstances. Like maybe the child has a disability, or maybe in this case, the child was conceived in rape. And so that's what we're specifically going to be focusing on today. So for context, rape only actually accounts for approximately 1% of abortions. This is from the Guttmacher Institute, which is a pro-abortion research institute. This was based on a 1987 study and a 2004 study, so it's not super up to date. It is nice to have more recent statistics, even though these studies still do get cited to this day. The Charlotte Lozier Institute, which is a pro-life research institute, in 2021, they looked at stats from 8 different states, and they found only 0.4% of abortions were due to rape and incest. So whether you're looking at a pro-abortion source or you're looking at a pro-life source, the point is that it's only a minuscule percentage of abortions are due to rape. Unfortunately, we don't have good stats on this in Canada. That just applies in general. There's very little data and very little reporting on abortion in Canada. So we kind of have to rely on these US metrics. Now, because of this, some people are a little bit disingenuous when they raise rape as an argument for abortion. And you can kind of like press them on that. And you can ask, does that mean that you're opposed to abortion in all other circumstances? Does that mean you think that abortion should be criminalized except in cases of rape? And if they say no, then you really know that they're just kind of using this as a trump card because they think it will be effective. And yet it's still really important for us to know how to respond to this argument, because we're still pro-life in all circumstances. We still think that every human being deserves protection, even in the case of rape. And I also find that when you're able to respond to this argument effectively, you essentially have all the pieces in place. And sometimes people will just change their mind on the abortion issue like that because you've really been able to address, the strongest, most compelling, most persuasive of pro-choice arguments. And if so you're able to change their mind on this topic, then usually other circumstances they'll realize, yeah, I guess abortion still isn't justified in those circumstances either. So even though only 1% of abortions are due to rape, I am a pro-life activist. I have a lot of conversations on this topic, and rape probably comes up in the majority of those conversations. And I'm sure plenty of other activists might be nodding along, and they might also realize that, yeah, this comes up super often. And so that's why we chose to focus on the rape exception today, is because this is such a common argument that you hear all the time. And it's really important to be able to know how to respond effectively to it. So when someone brings it up to me, when someone says, I'm pro-choice because what if a woman got pregnant after rape? The first thing that we need to do, the most important thing, is to acknowledge that rape is bad. And that seems super simple. It seems super obvious. And you might be thinking, isn't that unnecessary? Why do I need to say that? Doesn't everyone believe that? Here's the problem. The media has demonized pro-lifers. They've made us out to be monsters who just want to control women. So it's really important that we make it very clear at the beginning that we don't think that. We don't think that like rape is, no big deal. You know, if a woman gets pregnant after rape, then who really cares? She should have the kid anyway. That's not our position. Our position is that yes, pregnancy can be very difficult, especially in cases of rape. We still don't think that that justifies killing an innocent human being, but that doesn't mean that we don't have compassion for the women in that situation. And so I think we really need to go out of our way to convey that to people. It's also important because you don't know why this person is bringing up this circumstance. And it could be because they themselves have been raped or that they know someone who has been raped. And if they tell you that, then forget about abortion. Just put that aside for the moment. Focus on the person in front of you, because the person in front of you is saying that they themselves were dehumanized and that they were objectified and someone didn't recognize their human dignity. So it's really important to say, I'm sorry to hear that happened to you. It's really important to ask, like, have you talked to someone about that experience? Have you got counseling? Are you okay? Are you safe? Are you safe presently? Our focus as pro-lifers is often to make sure that the preborn child is not dehumanized. And we want people to see the humanity of the preborn. But in order for them to do that, we ourselves need to recognize the humanity of the person we're talking to and their dignity. So if they're saying that their own dignity was compromised, make sure that that becomes your focus. Maybe you can talk about abortion down the line. But right now, we need to establish, again, that rape is a horrible circumstance. And sometimes I will do that by acknowledging that, like, I unfortunately know people who have been sexually assaulted. And that's an experience that stays with them for years after. And sometimes it'll haunt them for the rest of their life. Again, you want to establish that you care about this issue. This is just good advice in general, is when someone brings up a pro-choice argument, to form common ground with them. That doesn't mean you agree with their conclusion that abortion is okay. It just means you're looking for any grain or kernel of truth in what they're saying that you can latch onto and that you can validate their feelings. Because a lot of times people are not going into this argument with, like, you know, philosophical like ponderings. They're just expressing really like basic feelings. They're thinking, if I was in a woman's shoes and I got raped and then I found out I was pregnant, I'm not really sure what I would do. I don't know if I'd be able to have a kid. So that's really what they're expressing. And again, we don't want them to kill the child, but we want to kind of recognize, I can see where you're coming from. A lot of these people are arguing in good faith. They just have compassion for the mothers in these circumstances. So if we form common ground, we can acknowledge both of us see rape as a problem. Both of us agree that pregnancy from rape would be difficult. Then we have laid the foundation so we can have a productive conversation about what the solution should be. And again, we might disagree about what the solution should be, but at the very least, we first need to acknowledge the problem. We need to agree on what the problem is and share that both of us care about it at the very least. Again, it's kind of unfair that we have to be like, we care, but that's just what the reality is. And so when I acknowledge that, you know, rape is a terrible thing, and I think pregnancy is difficult in the best of circumstances, let alone when it's complicated by these factors, especially rape, I think that women deserve support. Some people will also mention, like, I think rapists should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. We should do more to prevent rape. Again, I'm not telling you what to say word for word. I think the best way to respond to people is always very sincerely with what resonates with you and what you understand. There's going to be different approaches that work in different situations. I'm just walking you through different approaches and what are good guidelines to employ. So I say that again, I think women deserve support. I think where I'm going to disagree with the pro-choicer is what that support looks like and what is actually supporting that woman and what is actually harming her. So something that I'll mention at the beginning, which I think is really important, is that I think whether maybe it's subconscious, whether people realize it or not, they're kind of thinking of abortion as a way to kind of go back in time and almost like undo or like rewrite what has happened here. So I will preempt that. And after establishing again that rape is bad and that women deserve support, I will also mention that abortion doesn't unrape that woman. It doesn't erase her child. It just makes her the mother of a dead child. And so now, in addition to the trauma of the rape, she has to deal with the trauma of having killed her own offspring. And whether you're pro-choice or you're pro-life, that's not a psychologically neutral thing to do. And everyone will acknowledge that. What you're trying to do here is deal with one injustice by perpetrating another injustice on an innocent party. And that's never going to work out well for anybody. Another way that you can make a similar point is by asking the person you're talking to, is the rapist guilty? Does the rapist deserve punishment? And unless you're talking to a psychopath, hopefully they say, yes, the rapist is guilty. And then you can, again, form common ground and be like, is the mother innocent? Does she deserve support? She didn't deserve to have this happen to her. Again, hopefully they say, yes, I acknowledge that. We live in a Western nation, and generally most people agree that rape is bad. And so then you can ask, okay, but like going through this step by step, is the child then, the child who is conceived, is the child innocent or guilty? And if the person you're talking to is arguing in good faith, they will say that the child is innocent. And so then you can propose, why don't we create two survivors out of this situation instead of two victims from this situation? A terrible thing has occurred, and we can't undo it. It's already happened. So where do we go from here? And I think that by trying our best to support both mother and child, both of whom are innocent here, this is the most life-affirming and healing path forward. Sometimes you might only have 30 seconds to make your case. And you can do that by pointing out that in Canada, we don't give the death penalty to the rapist. And whether you think that's right or wrong, the question is, why should we give the death penalty to the innocent child then? And it's also important to remember that we're not just having a very philosophical, abstract debate here. We're talking about real people and real stakes with faces and names. So in conversations with people, I will mention, I know people who have been raped. I also know people who have been conceived in rape. These are three such people: Rebecca Kiesling, Ryan Bomberger, and Pam Stenzel. They all happen to be pro-life speakers. And I will say they have just as much of a right to life as you and I do. That the circumstances surrounding their conception do not determine their value. And their right to life does not depend on the identity of their father. And it's important to remember that all of us are children of God, and we really derive our identity, our true inner identity, in that title and that label. And so if the person you're talking to seems really callous and cold-hearted, then you can make it personal, because it is a personal issue. And you can ask questions like Rebecca Kiesling, for instance. She was conceived before Roe v. Wade in the United States was decided. And so abortion was illegal in that state. And so she owes her life to the fact there was a pro-life law in place that protected her life. And so you could ask someone, does Rebecca deserve to die? Or is the world better for Rebecca being alive and here today? And again, when you personalize it this way, then the hope is that, again, you're humanizing the victim in the situation, and then that might be able to cut through some barriers that people might have in their heart. Another way that you make this point is you could show two images of an ultrasound, or just two images of a preborn child developing in the womb. And you could ask which one was conceived in rape. And of course, the answer is going to be, I don't know. You can't tell is the point. Our value is the same regardless. And you could also do this with abortion victim photography. I'm not going to show that in the presentation today, but if you've ever seen those images, they're really disturbing. A dismembered child, it's very bloody, it's very tragic. And you could ask, is this okay to ever do to a human being? And the hope is that someone says no. And you could ask, was this child conceived in rape? They're not going to know. I don't know. Does it matter? Does it matter? Does being conceived in rape, do those circumstances surrounding your conception, does that suddenly make it okay to dismember another human being? Of course not. And that's the point, really, is that there is no difference between myself and Rebecca Kiesling. There's no difference between myself and Ryan Bomber when it comes to our inner value, when it comes to our worth as people, as human beings. So again, it's super important in conversation with someone who is pro-abortion to form common ground. And another super common tactic that pro-lifers use is called trotting out the toddler. And it doesn't have to be a toddler. All we're really talking about is when someone presents a situation that they think justifies abortion. We use that exact same situation, except instead of a preborn child, we substitute a born child. And we ask, does that circumstance justify killing a born child? And if the answer is no, then it's really not about that circumstance. It's really about, are the born and the preborn different, or are all human beings equal? And that's exactly the discussion we want to be having. That's what we want to focus on. So that pro-life syllogism I mentioned at the beginning, that it's wrong to kill innocent human beings and abortion kills innocent human beings, that's always what we want to be focusing on. We don't want to go down rabbit holes. We don't have different conversations. We want to be focusing in on those issues. Does abortion kill innocent human beings, and is it okay to kill innocent human beings? So the more we can get on track, the better. And so a way to do that when people are talking about rape is to give them this situation, which, you know, is plausible. Imagine a woman has consensual sex with her husband, and the following day is raped by a stranger. And then she conceives a child, but she's not sure if the child is the child of her husband or the rapist. So she ends up giving birth, and the child is a spitting image of the rapist. So she starts reliving that trauma. Would it be okay for her to kill her newborn baby in that circumstance? And the vast majority of people will say no. Thankfully, they'll say no. And so then the follow-up question is, what's the difference? Why would it be wrong to kill a newborn child conceived in rape, but not wrong to kill a preborn child conceived in rape? And there are differences between a born child and a preborn child. The preborn child is smaller, they look different, they're less developed, they're more dependent, but so too is a newborn child compared to an adult. A newborn child is also smaller and looks different and is less developed and more dependent. That doesn't mean that the newborn child is any bit less valuable than you or I. That doesn't mean that, you know, it's not as wrong to kill a newborn child. Our value is the same despite these differences in age. So if these differences don't matter after birth, why should they matter before birth? And again, this can be a lot longer and more complicated discussion, which I will not get into today, but this is, again, precisely the conversation we want to be having with people, is that it's not really about the circumstances. In a way, they're kind of a red herring. They can be, there's an emotional appeal to these circumstances, but really the question is, are all human beings equal? Are they all deserving of protection? And if the answer is yes, then even in these really horrible situations like rape, we need to be consistent and say that all human beings are deserving of legal protection, and it's always wrong to kill them. So these are the arguments that I'd recommend making in a conversation with someone that are persuasive. But just for edification, just because I think it's interesting to point out, I'll also mention that there are parallels between abortion and rape, in that they both violate human dignity. That's why they're both wrong. They both dehumanize and objectify another. Often for like one's own selfish whims and selfish gain is that you put yourself above another human being. And that's never okay. And that's not to say that women who get abortions are the same as rapists. That's definitely not to say that. I think there are differences as well. It is to say that, again, both of these are examples of violating human dignity, even if the intentions vary somewhat. And if you were ever talking to someone who is maybe a little bit obnoxious about it, and maybe you don't think that they're arguing in good faith, then you can be maybe a little bit snappy back and say that, actually, I oppose abortion for the same reason that I oppose rape, in that they're both acts of violence. And I think that that's wrong. So again, a lot of people will look at pro-lifers as if we lack compassion, when really, I think we're being very consistent, and the same impulse that would cause us to oppose rape is the same impulse that causes us to oppose abortion as well, and that this is not how you treat other human beings, and you should never perpetrate violence upon innocent human beings. Again, not recommending that you raise this in conversations with people, but I think it's just interesting to consider that actually we're being very consistent at the end of the day. So there's a lot more to say about this topic, but I only have limited time. So I will point you to savetheone.com if you would like to learn more about this issue. This is run by Rebecca Kiesling, who I mentioned earlier was conceived in rape. And the one here is referring to like the 1% of abortion cases, the hard cases that people always use to kind of try to justify abortion. And her argument is that these people matter too, whether they were conceived in rape, whether there's fetal abnormalities of some sort. And I really like, she's obviously referencing here the story of the Good Shepherd, who leaves behind his flock of 99 in order to rescue the one. And I really like that image of the pro-life movement refusing to abandon any of the vulnerable people in our charge, and to say that they all matter, including the 1%, including the one lost lamb. And even if it means, like, I think the parallel here is that some pro-lifers will choose to focus on the 99% of cases because they think it's easier to argue against abortion in those circumstances. But I think we really should follow the example of the Good Shepherd in saying, no, all of those innocent parties matter, and we should protect all of them, even if it means that, tackling a hard argument that people are not as sympathetic on. I think we deserve to do so, and people like Rebecca Kiesling and Ryan Baumberger and Pam Stenzel, they deserve our support as well. So with all of that said, again, please feel free to visit savetheone.com if you're interested in learning more.